So this is a budget we've all been looking forward to, in fact the country itself, because it's the first budget that was being presented by a woman finance minister. And in some ways we are not disappointed. I mean, there is a womanly touch in many places, and I would say two things. One, the even-handedness with which the economy has been approached. And two, the eye for detail. You can see it at every point in the speech. The speech itself was a little longer than usual, and I would say a bit unusual in focusing a little too much on the achievements of the first term of this government. Of course, all politicians are partisan, but this seemed a little excessive, and too much of the budget speech was spent on actually highlighting the achievements of this government 2014 to 2019. But be that as it may, let me start by pointing out what I thought were significantly positive aspects of this budget. The significantly positive aspects of this budget is the first is the infusion of capital to the banking sector. This is impressive. Some may think that 70,000 crores is not enough, but it's still a very large sum of money. And Nirmala Sitharaman has certainly put her finger on one of the nerve centers of the economy and one of the sectors which is really contributing to the current state of affairs, the sclerosis, so to speak. So I think that's a good thing. We're also told that the capital infusion will go with governance reforms now, in particular in the public sector banks. We don't know what those governance reforms are going to be, so we'll wait and see. But it is correct that you should have governance reforms. Otherwise, there's no point in putting this money in. We'll probably be doing it again five years down the road. So the capital infusion to the public sector banks is one thing, and as part of this approach to dealing with the financial situation is that she's also allowed the public sector banks to buy stake in NBFCs, or rather purchase some of the financial paper of the NBFCs, so that the NBFCs that themselves can be put on given some capital infusion. So this is very imaginative, and I think it's a very good thing and is an important takeaway from the budget. What are some of the other points? The first, of course, is, I would say, the planning to ensure that every rural household in India will have electricity by 2022 unless it is unwilling to actually take a connection. These are the finance minister's words. And this has been combined with the effort to reach cooking fuel, clean cooking fuel to all households. And this has already been part of the Narendra Modi government's schemes, but Nirmala Sitharaman seems to have clinched it by ensuring that almost every household in rural India will have this. So that's the first thing, and it's very important. The second is the attention to water. We already have a Jal Shakti ministry, which has been formed by the Prime Minister. But in addition, Nirmala Sitharaman has announced schemes for water conservation, for the possible reuse of household wastewater for agricultural purposes, recharging of wells, etc. The fourth is the encouragement of solar power, again especially in rural India, but all over India. The phasing out possibly of incandescent bulbs, and including CFL lamps, and replacing completely by LED with a view to reducing pollution. And finally, in the area of taxation, most of the provisions are in the nature of easing of tax administration, making compliance easier. This for the individual and for the SME sector, with the proposed streamlining of GST, where you need to file less frequent returns. In the case of individuals, income tax scrutiny will now take place purely through a electronic medium, there'll be no interface whatsoever, and the scope for human intervention in the settlement of income tax cases is almost entirely eliminated. This is very impressive. I'm not speaking much about the raising of the tax limit, etc., exemption limit, about which much has probably been talked about in the media already. So these, apart from the capital infusion, all of these are welfare measures. And there's absolutely nothing wrong about that. I think the finance minister herself said that the purpose of an economy is to ease our living. Though, of course, almost all the ease of living provisions she made were really in the form of ease of doing business. Ease of living should also be seen as infrastructure in the form of urban infrastructure, sidewalks, parks, etc., about which little has been said. But nevertheless, these are clearly, there's a stamp of welfare about it, and possibly of a woman finance minister on these in these measures, other than again capital infusion. Where I think the budget fails is to show a path to the other aspiration of the finance minister and her government. She has repeated what Prime Minister Modi said about 10 days ago in the first meeting of the GST Council after the elections, that the intention of this government is to raise India to be a $5 trillion economy by 2024. Now, the finance minister mentioned that we are at something like $3 trillion at the moment, and therefore we are talking of almost doubling India's national income in the next 5 years. And if that is the ambition, then I think the budget has not shown us a roadmap. In particular, I would say that there's absolutely no mention of investment whatsoever. At least the economic survey released yesterday talked about investment, but it really went on to state, in my view, slightly ideologically, that almost all this investment should take the form of private investment. But Finance Minister Sitharaman hasn't told us anything about why investment would rise. Now, in the present situation where we have been seeing declining investment for the past 5 years, especially in the private sector, promises or statements about the goal of $5 trillion economy seems a little shaky. Without any mention of where this investment is going to come from. And I would have thought that under the present circumstances, this investment should have come from public investment, but the finance minister has several times spoken about a minimum government in her own budget speech. So it's very unlikely that there's any step up in public investment that is imagined, and her final statement that the fiscal deficit has been lowered marginally to 3.3% of GDP as in line with the glide map for fiscal adjustment. I don't think there's going to be any major rise in public investment. So from that point of view, I would be very, very, very skeptical of the idea that India can reach 5 trillion by 2024 on the basis of this government's economic policies so far, and I don't think the budget has really given any push to the economy in that direction. Now, along with the proposed or aspiration of India moving to be a $5 trillion economy is also the Make in India proposal, which is not new. It's already been as part of the Prime Minister's program for the past 5 years. The finance minister mentioned it again and mentioned about making India a manufacturing hub, especially for electronic goods, semiconductors, photovoltaic cells, solar radiators, etc. Now, I'm a little skeptical, partly because the Make in India program didn't take off very well over the past 5 years, and the reason why it didn't take off is again precisely because the investment was not forthcoming, neither in the form of public investment nor in the form of private investment. I repeat, the private investment as a whole declined in India over the past 5 years, though most pronouncedly in the SMAC sector. The corporate investment probably broadly held as a share of GDP, but certainly showed no dramatic increase despite the improvement in the ease of doing business in the index, etc. So on these two matters, which is once again taking the India to $5 trillion and Make in India, the government shows no roadmap. And finally, I would say, shows no roadmap. The route to this would be through investment. There's no reason to believe that what the budget has proposed would necessarily bring in that investment. And it's also kind of interesting that the Make in India program has been given a thrust via raising tariffs, which is kind of unusual and goes against what has been attempted in India for the past 25 years, and these tariffs and the tariff increase, there have been tariff increases and there have been tariff decreases. These are not fully aligned in my view, because there have been increases and decreases on raw material, which makes you believe that some of this may have been influenced by lobbies, presumably. Presumably not, but it's possible theoretically that's the case. Finally, I want to conclude by saying that what makes a budget welfareist as opposed to be purely concerned with welfare is in terms of its approach to to what has been referred to as agrarian distress in the past 2 or 3 years. There is no specific allocation made for agriculture or particular schemes, though the water schemes are important. I would have thought that two things that the government could have emphasized in the agriculture sector as far as production are concerned is capital investment, especially public investment, to make Indian agriculture drought-free or drought-resistant at least, if not entirely drought-free. That has not been there. The government seems to believe, it seems to me, that the Prime Minister Pradhan Mantri Kisan Nidhi, which it announced just before the elections, is sufficient, and which has just now expanded. All of which requires a great deal of the public's funds, leaving less for public investment, which I think is disturbing. And finally, I would think that something which could have been done in the agriculture sector is and that's been flagged for some time, it's not a particularly novel point, is that we should have strengthened our extension system. Farmers seem, of course there is access to WhatsApp groups and the rest of it, but I think you need to have a extension officer in every Krishi Vigyan Kendra, and the extension services should be actually much more robust than they are. So once again, an interesting budget from India's first finance minister for its detail and in some sense even-handedness. I didn't clarify what I meant by even-handedness when I first meant it. She starts off by talking about the manufacturing and the global economy and India's need to integrate with it, and just when you thought she may be giving too much attention to manufacturing and to finance, she moves on to talk about Grameen India, which is basically about the agriculture sector. She then went on to talk about Shahri India, which is about urban India and the ease of living in urban India and what the government could do to promote it. She then talked about the youth of India. So there's a certain even-handedness. Much has been covered and there is great attention to detail. However, the roadmap to the $5 trillion economy, which is the aspiration of the government, and the not so successful Make in India program of Mr. Modi's first term has not really been addressed in any very serious way.
To receive instant updates on all videos from The Wire, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Pay to support independent journalism. Click the link in the description and choose the amount you want to pay.